Modern Love, the podcast, is supported by...
Produced by the iLab at WBUR, Boston.
From the New York Times and WBUR Boston, this is Modern Love. Stories of love, loss, and redemption. I'm your host, Meghna Chakrabarty. What do you do when the clock runs out on a relationship? When there's no more time left to ask the questions you need answered? That's what Bruce Eric Kaplan sorts through in his essay, Missing a Father I Hardly Knew. Willem Dafoe, who was recently nominated for an Academy Award for his role in the Florida Project, reads Bruce's piece.
The psychic started to laugh. "What?" I said. "After your father dies," she said, "you're going to find out something about him. Something hilarious." "Wow. What?" "They aren't saying, but apparently it's really funny. It's been going on for a while." "Is it going on right now?" "Definitely." This is very frustrating, I thought. "Is it sexual?" I asked. "I think so, but it doesn't have to be." I scrolled through the various possibilities to think of what it could be. Nothing felt like him. "Obviously," she said, "you must have sensed already that he had this surprising thing going on that you know nothing about that is just totally crazy and hilarious." I thought for a moment. "No." "Well, whatever it is, when you find out, you're going to laugh." This conversation happened 9 years ago. My wife was writing a television pilot based on a book about a famous psychic. We were having dinner with the psychic, and she did an impromptu session with me so Kate could see her in action. I say this to stress that the prediction came from someone a lot of people considered to be a very reliable source. When my father, Jerry, was dying just over 2 years ago, I kept thinking about how little I knew him, which isn't to say I hadn't spent time with him. I lived with both him and my mother in Maplewood, New Jersey, until I went to college. I talked to him on the phone every week when, soon after leaving college, I moved to Los Angeles. I came back frequently to see them, and then him, after my mother died. And in the last 5 years, I've worked on a television show that shoots in New York and saw him every spring and summer. But I am here to say we almost never talked about anything. Nothing. Zero. Once after one of our excruciatingly dull phone calls, I ran to the table where I draw cartoons and quickly did one of a man on a telephone saying, "I'm not trying to say anything, I'm just talking." The week that cartoon appeared in the New Yorker, I spoke to my father and he chuckled and said, "Your cartoon was very funny this week." I was startled. First, he didn't often comment on my cartoons, but even more odd, it was about him, and I wondered, does he know it's about him? And if he does know, shouldn't he be upset? And if he's upset, shouldn't I be upset? But since he doesn't sound upset, he must not realize it's about him. So he must think it's about other people. But he can't think that, because other people actually say things, and he doesn't. Okay, we didn't talk about nothing, but nothing was ever really said. We basically talked about relatives, movies he saw, or books he read. But the conversation had to stay at a certain level or he would get frustrated or stay silent. Once, when he called me and asked what was new, and I told him my wife had had her 3rd miscarriage in 2 years, he simply hung up the phone. When we were growing up, there was another Jerry Kaplan in Maplewood. We would get his mail sometimes. We didn't really know him, but there was something striking about the fact that there was this other Jerry Kaplan wandering around town, also taking the train to and from Manhattan each day. I wonder now if it was so striking because there was actually another Jerry Kaplan living in our house. The other Jerry Kaplan was inside of our Jerry Kaplan. My father would often start to say something, then say, "Forget it." It would be right when he was going to be real with you, say something he was really thinking. Then he wouldn't. It was almost as if he would be in danger if he did. Now, when someone starts to say something and then says, "Forget it," I get unnaturally angry. Starting to say something and then saying, "Forget it," is the worst thing you can do to a person, I say every time it happens. Which I don't really believe, but I do. I'm assuming my father learned at an early age that there is nothing more dangerous than showing your true self. I think a lot of us learn that, and it actually may be true, but many of us tried to unlearn that. He didn't. So all I can really tell you about my father is that he did odd things, like put tin foil on a bottle of beer after having a few sips, then put it in the refrigerator to perhaps have on another night. I don't even know if he actually had the beer in the subsequent days it would sit in the refrigerator with the tin foil on it. He loved to sing, "Oh, you can't fool me, I'm sticking to the Union." As far as I know, he read every book written by Susan Isaacs, Rona Jaffe, Avery Corman, and Evan Hunter. He could be well-meaning. My mother always bought our birthday gifts. The first year after she died, he worked hard to get me a gift he thought I would like. He sent me Manhattan When I Was Young by Mary Cantwell. When I called to thank him, he was very proud of himself. "Didn't I get you the type of book you would like?" he asked. "Yes. I had to look for a really long time, but then I saw it and knew that it was the one to get." "You did a great job," I said. I didn't mention that I had already read it. In fact, I had given my copy to my mother and him, and it was in his house. When I was little, he would buy me a miniature chocolate pudding pie from the old German lady's bakery on Springfield Avenue. And when I was old, he would still buy them for me when I came to his house to visit. With the little chocolate shavings atop the whipped cream, those pies looked like tiny pieces of art. And my father had certain things he loved, like network TV movies, all network TV movies, any network TV movie. It could be about a woman in jeopardy, as so many of the women in them were, or a family in jeopardy, my favorite genre. Any time a family went on a vacation, a motorcycle gang would torture them for no good reason, which was extremely unfair. Or it could be a comedic one about two women who switched lives. Or a melodramatic one where someone like a teenage Susan Day is wrongfully put in a woman's prison. Or a light romantic comedy about a woman who loses a lot of weight and gets a new life, played by Patty Duke. Patty Duke was in a lot of them. Then Patty Duke Aston was in a lot, then Patty Duke again. Most nights, because they were on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, my mother would ask what TV movie was on. Night Terror, my father might say. As you might guess from the title, this was a woman in jeopardy one. Valerie Harper is driving across country by herself, and as often happened to these women, a stranger suddenly starts torturing her until, I think, she is forced to kill him in self-defense. They were almost always forced to kill the man in self-defense. "What's it about?" my mother would ask. "It's based on a Sartre story," my father would reply, no matter what the movie was about. The first time, she really thought it was. Then it became their joke. Our joke, I guess. Because when I think about it now, I smile. So after my father died, I waited for what the psychic said was going to happen. Some big and hilarious secret would be revealed. To be honest, I didn't really believe it would, but I hoped. I wanted to find out what was really going on in that enormous bald head. It was my last chance, in fact. But as you may have suspected, I didn't find out a thing. Nothing private or interesting was revealed, and still hasn't been, and I guess never will be. So I'm never going to get that laugh the psychic said I would, and I will never really know my father, and that's that. It's a strange and sad thing to miss someone you never knew. On the other hand, he gave me so much I do remember. The nice things he would do, like buy me mini chocolate pudding pies, and the strange things like the tinfoil on the beer bottle, and the idea that no matter how banal, every story is based on a Sartre story. Probably even this one.
Willem Dafoe, reading Bruce Eric Kaplan's essay, Missing a Father I Hardly Knew. We asked Willem why he chose this piece.
Basically, I like the details in the story. They aren't from my life, but they felt very familiar and expressed something poetic. And then ultimately, I think about my father, who has passed, and I loved him, but I didn't know who he was.
We'll hear from Bruce Eric Kaplan after the break. Bruce Eric Kaplan is a cartoonist and a TV writer who's worked on Girls, Seinfeld, and 6 Feet Under. And he says that he wrote this piece for a simple reason.
I just wasn't done. The relationship was over. There's nothing more over than someone dying. But there were a lot of questions for me about my father. And I wrote the piece because I was grappling with them. This person who loomed so importantly in my life, and still does, I felt I didn't know who he was really because he didn't share so much of himself. So I don't blame him and I wrote a memoir about my parents, and the dedication is, this is for my parents who tried. And, that's what I believe. I believe my parents tried their best. It sounds so sad. For a funny piece, it sounds so sad.
So Bruce didn't have a strong connection with his parents when he was a kid, but he did have something else.
I watched TV, constantly. And I loved it so much that I always say that I wanted to crawl into the television. I always felt something was missing in my interactions with my parents in a way that I didn't when I was watching TV. Because on TV, emotions were so honest in a way that wasn't happening in my real life. And I do think it's why I became a TV writer, because I wanted so much to go inside of it that I did. I know that I've always been drawn in the TV shows that I've worked on to themes of intimacy and the scariness of intimacy. And I think it comes from growing up in a house where on some level a message was sent that you can only be so intimate, otherwise it will be used against you. I felt like if I was upset, that was just too much for them. Like my father, hangs up the phone. He literally hung up the phone, didn't say goodbye. just click. Like when I was upset, when we had that, the phone call about my wife's miscarriages, he just couldn't deal with it. It was just like that. I'm not capable of being in this moment.
Bruce has 2 kids. They're 10 and 12. And he says that his relationship with them is vastly different than the relationship he had with his father.
Obviously, when you're a parent, you do a lot of things that are just like your parents. In other ways, when you become a parent, you try to be the parent that you didn't have. And I know I've overcorrected in that way with my kids, because my parents, I never knew what was really in their heads. I'm always sharing with them, like, what's in my head. Nothing that's inappropriate for them, but just if I'm upset, they know I'm upset. I always want them to know that how I'm acting to them is not always a response to them, because I never understood that as a child.
As for the possibly hilarious thing that the psychic saw about his father?
After the piece was published, someone came up to me and said, "Was the psychic so-and-so?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, my mother goes to the psychic. She says the psychic says that about everyone." But I can't help myself. Even though that was said to me, I still wonder, but does the psychic really say that to everyone? Or is it about my father? Part of me still believes, like, well, maybe I'll find out the truth from the psychic, or maybe I'll learn something from someone that will make me know this person better. I still dream about my parents. And, there's a part of me that thinks, like, could I dream something that will reflect the truth, and then I'll wake up and I'll know more and we'll be closer than we were in real life. And I still can't quite believe that the relationship is over and it won't be more than what it was.
Bruce Eric Kaplan. He's a cartoonist and TV writer living in Los Angeles. After the break, Dan Jones, editor of Modern Love for the New York Times. Dan Jones says that to him, this is a story about foiled expectations.
It's so funny how he begins the piece with being promised this mystery about his father that he's going to find out about later, and that this tantalizing aspect, that it's some sexual mystery about his father. And, of course, the reader is promised that too, or the listener. And you think, okay, well, the payoff of this essay is going to be, we'll get to know this father better, and we'll get to know this mystery. And, of course, you don't get either of those things, and neither does the writer. And so at the end, you have to think, well, what is it about? And to me, it's sort of about the poignancy of realizing and accepting the truth of that.
Next week, Kumail Nanjiani and Emily Gordon of The Big Sick. They read an essay about how a mother's cooking comes between a husband and wife.
My mother may not wear her emotions on her sleeves, but that's only because her sleeves are rolled up and her emotions are lying in the bottom of a pot. My rejection of her kimchi chicken is a rejection of what she does, who she is. I know this, but I have to push back because there's another woman in my life who wants to cook for me.
Modern Love is a production of the New York Times and WBUR, Boston's NPR station. It's produced, directed, and edited by Jessica Alpert, John Parati, Amory Sievertson, and Caitlin O'Keefe. The idea for the Modern Love podcast was conceived by Lisa Tobin. Iris Adler is our executive producer. Daniel Jones is the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times and advisor to the show. Music for the podcast, courtesy of APM. I'm Megan Chakrabarty. See you next week.